This is the story of Toni Morrison, born Chloe Anthony Wofford on February 18, 1931, in that same steel town of Lorain, Ohio. But before we dive into her incredible literary journey, let me paint you a picture of the woman who would become, in the words of the Nobel Committee, a literary artist of the first rank who delves into the language itself, a language she wants to liberate from the fetters of race. Morrison didn't just write books, she created monuments. When she accepted the Frederick G. Melcher Book Award in 1988, she said something that still gives me chills. "There is no suitable memorial or plaque or wreath or wall or park or skyscraper lobby honoring the memory of the human beings forced into slavery and brought to the United States. There's no small bench by the road, and because such a place doesn't exist that I know of, the book had to." Can you imagine? She literally wrote literature as memorial, as sacred space, as witness to the unwitnessed. Morrison's childhood was steeped in storytelling. Her family filled their home with folk tales, songs, and the rich oral tradition of Black culture. Her mother sang, her grandfather played violin, and young Chloe absorbed it all like a sponge. At 12, she converted to Catholicism and took the baptismal name Anthony, after Saint Anthony of Padua. Later, at Howard University, classmates found Chloe difficult to pronounce, so she adopted the nickname Toni. And the rest, as they say, is literary history. Here's what amazes me about Morrison's journey. She published her first novel at 39, while working as a textbook editor and raising 2 sons as a single mother. Can you imagine? Writing what would become one of America's most important novels in stolen moments between diaper changes and editorial deadlines. That novel was The Bluest Eye, published in 1970, and it emerged from that childhood conversation I mentioned earlier. 20 years after her friend's devastating confession about praying for blue eyes, Morrison was still haunted by the question, who teaches a child to hate herself? Who makes a beautiful Black girl believe she's a freak? In her own words, "I focused on how something as grotesque as the demonization of an entire race could take root inside the most delicate member of society, a child, the most vulnerable member, a female." The Bluest Eye tells the heartbreaking story of 11-year-old Pecola Breedlove, who believes that blue eyes will make her beautiful and loved. Set in Morrison's hometown of Lorain in 1941, the novel exposes how white beauty standards can destroy Black children from within. The initial print run? Just 2,000 copies. Morrison was virtually unknown. But that small book would eventually change American literature forever. Now here's what makes Morrison's complete body of work so extraordinary. Each book represents a step in her evolution as America's conscience. After The Bluest Eye came Sula in 1973, a story of friendship between 2 Black women that earned her a National Book Award nomination. This novel explored the complex bond between Nell and Sula, 2 women whose friendship survives childhood, but fractures under the weight of adult choices and societal expectations. Then came Song of Solomon in 1977, which won the National Book Critics Circle Award and marked her arrival as a major literary voice. This novel follows Milkman Dead's quest for identity and family history, weaving together themes of flight, freedom, and the search for roots. Critics immediately recognized Morrison's unique ability to blend folklore with contemporary narrative, creating something entirely new in American literature. Tar Baby followed in 1981, exploring themes of cultural identity and class within the Black community through the relationship between Jadine, a Black model, and Son, a man who represents everything she's tried to escape. But then came 1987 and everything changed. Beloved, perhaps the most powerful American novel about slavery ever written, erupted onto the literary scene like a force of nature. Here's where Morrison's story becomes almost mythical in its power. While working on The Black Book in 1974, a compilation of Black history that Morrison edited at Random House, she discovered a newspaper clipping from 1856. It told the story of Margaret Garner, an enslaved woman who escaped from Kentucky to Ohio with her family. When U.S. Marshals caught up with them, Margaret made an unthinkable choice. She killed her 2-year-old daughter with a butcher knife rather than see her return to slavery. The other children lay wounded but alive when they found her. Morrison carried Margaret Garner's story for 13 years before Beloved was born. She dedicated the novel to 60 million and more, the estimated number of Africans and their descendants who died as a result of the slave trade. The novel follows Seth, based on Margaret, whose house at 124 Bluestone Road is haunted by the angry spirit of the child she killed. when a mysterious young woman named Beloved appears, claiming to know impossible things about Sethi's past, the psychological horror begins. Beloved won the Pulitzer Prize in 1988, but that's just the beginning of its impact. In 2006, the New York Times ranked it the best work of American fiction published between 1981 and 2006. It's been adapted into an opera, with Morrison herself writing the libretto. Oprah Winfrey produced and starred in the film adaptation, but perhaps most importantly, it forced America to confront the lasting trauma of slavery in ways no other work had dared. Then came Morrison's Nobel Prize moment in 1993. Picture this: she became the first African-American woman, the first to receive the Nobel Prize for Literature. In Stockholm, she delivered what many consider one of the greatest speeches in Nobel history. She told a parable about a blind old woman, wise in the ways of words, who is visited by young people carrying a bird. "Is it living or dead?" they ask. The woman's response cuts to the heart of everything Morrison believed about language and power. "I don't know," the old woman says, "but what I do know is that it is in your hands. It is in your hands." Morrison was talking about language itself, how we can use it to oppress or liberate, to wound or heal, to silence or give voice to the silenced. She warned against what she called dead language, the kind that does more than represent violence. It is violence. She spoke of language that drinks blood, laps vulnerabilities, tucks its fascist boots under crinolines of respectability and patriotism. But Morrison's creative journey didn't end with the Nobel Prize. She continued writing, teaching, and pushing boundaries with remarkable consistency. Jazz appeared in 1992, written in the style of jazz performance itself, with themes that improvise and build like musical movements. Set in 1920s Harlem, this novel tells the story of violence and passion through a narrative voice that shifts and changes like a jazz soloist taking the melody in unexpected directions. Paradise followed in 1997, opening with one of the most famous and controversial first lines in literature: "They shoot the white girl first." This novel explores an all-black town in 1970s Oklahoma and the women's shelter that threatens its masculine order. Morrison continued to challenge readers with Love in 2003, examining the destructive power of obsession through the story of Bill Cozy and the women whose lives he dominated. A Mercy in 2008 took readers back to 17th century America, exploring the origins of slavery through the eyes of Florence, a young enslaved girl. Home arrived in 2011, following Korean War veteran Frank Money as he journeys to save his sister. Morrison's final novel, God Help the Child, in 2014, brought her storytelling into contemporary times, examining how childhood trauma echoes through generations. Each novel was an experiment, a risk, a refusal to repeat herself. Morrison once said her project rises from delight, not disappointment, and you can feel that joy in language throughout her work. She didn't just write about Black experience, she created a new way of writing it, one that refused to explain itself to white audiences or apologize for its complexity. But Morrison's influence extended far beyond novels. Her short story, Recitatif, published in 1983, remains one of the most studied works in American literature. In this brilliant piece, two women, one black, one white, meet repeatedly throughout their lives. But Morrison never reveals which character is which race, forcing readers to confront their own assumptions about identity and belonging. Her nonfiction work deserves special attention. Playing in the Dark, Whiteness and the Literary Imagination, from 1992, examines how white American authors have used Black characters to explore themes of freedom and fear. Morrison argues that the Africanist presence is essential to understanding American literature, even when it's ignored or marginalized. She forces us to see how whiteness defines itself against Blackness, how American literature is haunted by the very people it tries to silence. Morrison also wrote children's books with her son Slade, including The Big Box, The Book of Mean People, and several picture books like Peanut Butter Fudge and Little Cloud and Lady Wind. These works explored themes of freedom, identity, and self-worth for young readers, proving that Morrison's ability to address complex themes transcended age barriers. Her essays, speeches, and meditations were collected in works like The Source of Self-Regard and Mouthful of Blood, both published in 2019, the year she died. Reading these feels like sitting with Morrison herself, hearing her thoughts on everything from the function of art to the responsibility of writers to bear witness. In these collections, we see her brilliant mind grappling with questions of race, literature, and social justice across decades of thinking and writing. Beyond her writing, Morrison's role as an editor at Random House proved revolutionary. She acquired and edited books by Angela Davis, Toni Bambara, Huey Newton, and Gail Jones, fundamentally changing the landscape of American publishing. One of her most successful editorial projects was Muhammad Ali's autobiography, The Greatest, My Own Story. Morrison once said of her editorial work, "I look very hard for black fiction because I want to participate in developing a canon of black work where black people are talking to black people." Here's a fascinating detail that shows Morrison's dedication to her craft. She had a daily writing ritual that never changed. She would wake before dawn, make coffee in the darkness, and sit drinking it while watching the light come. Only then would she begin to write. This attention to ritual, to the sacred act of creation, infused everything she produced with a sense of reverence and purpose. Morrison's academic career was equally impressive. She taught at Texas Southern University, Howard University, Yale, and finally Princeton, where she held the Robert F. Goheen Chair in the Humanities from 1989 to 2006. Her students remember her as demanding but nurturing, someone who challenged them to find their own voices while honoring the literary traditions that came before them. The same year she won the Nobel Prize, 1993, Morrison's home caught fire in Grandview, New York. About 120 firefighters from 2 towns responded to the blaze that destroyed the old 4-story colonial house. Some of her manuscripts were lost in the fire, but Morrison's response was characteristically resilient. She simply kept writing, kept creating, kept pushing forward. What makes Morrison's story truly remarkable is that she never lost sight of her roots. Even as she won every major literary award, even as she became a global icon, she remained deeply connected to the storytelling traditions of her childhood. She once said she wrote for black people talking to black people, not because she excluded others, but because she refused to let the white gaze determine her artistic vision. The influence of her work continues to ripple outward in ways that would have amazed even Morrison herself. The Toni Morrison Society has placed actual benches by the road, memorial benches at sites significant to the history of slavery, making real the metaphor Morrison created in her Melcher Award speech. The first was dedicated in 2008 on Sullivan's Island, South Carolina, where 40% of enslaved Africans first entered the United States. Morrison said she was deeply moved by these memorials. Students around the world study her novels not just as literature, but as historical documents, psychological studies, and spiritual texts. Her work appears on reading lists from high school through graduate school, challenging new generations to confront difficult truths about American history and human nature. Yet despite their serious themes, Morrison's books remain deeply readable, filled with moments of beauty, humor, and grace that remind us why storytelling matters. Morrison received numerous honors throughout her career, including the Presidential Medal of Freedom from Barack Obama in 2012, honorary degrees from universities around the world, and countless literary prizes. But perhaps the most fitting tribute came from her readers, millions of people whose lives were changed by encountering her words, who found in her stories both mirror and map for understanding their own experiences. When Morrison passed away on August 5, 2019 at the age of 88, the literary world mourned the loss of a true giant, but her words live on, continuing to challenge, comfort, and inspire. In her Nobel speech, she said something that perfectly captures her legacy. "We die. That may be the meaning of life, but we do language. That may be the measure of our lives." She measured her life in words that gave voice to the voiceless, dignity to the dismissed, and beauty to experiences society had deemed ugly. From that conversation about blue eyes on a Lorain street to the Stockholm Concert Hall where she accepted the Nobel Prize, Morrison's journey reminds us that literature can be revolutionary. It can force a nation to confront its deepest wounds, challenge its most cherished myths, and imagine new possibilities for human connection. Her complete works, 11 novels, multiple nonfiction books, children's literature, essays, and speeches, form a body of work unmatched in its scope, power, and moral clarity. If you're a book lover ready to embark on this literary journey, I recommend starting with The Bluest Eye, that first novel born from childhood trauma and adult wisdom. Then move to Beloved, but prepare yourself emotionally. These aren't easy reads, but they're essential ones. Don't miss her nonfiction, especially Playing in the Dark, which will change how you read American literature forever. And if you want to see Morrison's storytelling gifts in their purest form, seek out Recitatif, 20 pages that will stay with you for years. You can find detailed reading guides, discussion questions, and community conversations about all of Morrison's works at hookedtobooks.com, where fellow book lovers gather to explore the kind of transformative literature that changes not just how we read, but how we see the world. Join our community of readers who believe, like Morrison did, that literature can be both mirror and map, showing us who we are and pointing toward who we might become. Sign up for our email list to get regular recommendations for books that matter, books that challenge, books that heal. Morrison once wrote, "The function, the very serious function of racism, is distraction." But her work serves the opposite function. It focuses our attention on what matters most: our shared humanity, our capacity for both cruelty and grace, and our responsibility to use language not as a weapon, but as a bridge. In a world increasingly divided by fear and misunderstanding, Morrison's voice calls us back to what literature does best. It makes us feel less alone. Her novels remind us that every story matters, every voice deserves to be heard, and every life contains multitudes worthy of witness. Whether she's writing about a girl who wants blue eyes, a friendship that survives everything except adulthood, a man learning to fly, or a ghost who won't rest until her story is told, Morrison never forgot that behind every narrative lies a human heart beating with hope, fear, love, and longing. So here's my challenge to you, fellow book lover. Don't just read Toni Morrison's books. Let them read you. Let them change you. Let them make you uncomfortable, and then sit with that discomfort until it transforms into understanding. Because that's what great literature does. It doesn't just entertain us, it enlarges us. Subscribe to our channel to discover more authors who share Morrison's commitment to truth-telling through story. And visit hookedtobooks.com to join conversations with readers who understand that books aren't just entertainment, they're transformation. From a young girl who wanted blue eyes to a Nobel Laureate who gave voice to millions, Toni Morrison's story reminds us that our wounds can become our wisdom, our pain can become our purpose, and our individual stories can become universal truths. In the end, that may be the most powerful lesson of all. We all have stories worth telling, voices worth hearing, and the power to use language to create the world we want to live in. That's the true legacy of Toni Morrison. Not just the books she wrote, but the permission she gave the rest of us to tell our own stories with courage, honesty, and hope. Her complete bibliography stands as testament to the power of persistence, the importance of bearing witness, and the endless possibilities that emerge when we refuse to let others define our worth or limit our dreams. And that permission? Well, that's in your hands now.